Hello, my name is Riana Elyse Anderson. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health in the Health Behavior and Health Education Department. The kind of work that I do is mainly focused on researching how racial discrimination negatively impacts the mental health and well-being of Black adolescents and their families. And I, as a clinical psychologist, think about ways that cultural strengths like the talk help to essentially interrupt the relationship between discrimination and mental health. So said another way, how do we drop kick that relationship between what discrimination does to Black children's mental health and well-being by utilizing some of the things families are already doing in a clinically meaningful way? It relates to human rights because we know that Black children can thrive when they are not impeded by some of the stressors and the real experiences that society places on them. So if they're thriving and if they're able to live a life unencumbered by some of these social and cultural forces, then they have the right to life, liberty, and happiness, right? Like they're able to be, again, unencumbered by some of these things that are going on their backs, that are piercing through their bodies, that are eating away and eroding at some of their basic rights of wellness and living well. We've been talking a lot about this, really two things. One, just being able to breathe. So in the past few years, this idea of I can't breathe has permeated through the last words of infamous Black men at this point. But what happens to our bodies when we go into racial shock is akin to a chokehold, right? It's the physiological equivalent of being chokeholded when you're in a state of racial shock and terror. So you're actually not able to breathe in those instances. And what we're saying essentially is that anytime we go through these racial terrors and traumas, we're putting on our bodies this inability to breathe. So when you take that racial trauma and then you combine it with a respiratory disease like COVID, the ability to breathe as a basic human right is being stripped away from millions of Black people at this time. So that's one thought. The second is that I've been contending with this idea of Black lives mattering. So since we heard that in our lexicon in 2013, 2014, this idea that Black lives matter, to make a statement of that sort troubles some people, and they believe, of course, that we should be talking about all lives mattering. But as a psychologist, I kind of think about it in another way. I want people to be able to live, right? So that's what we're saying, that Black lives matter. We want them to be able to live and to have that life. But I also indicate that Black life matters. So the ability to live that life in a way that is full of right, is full of happiness, is full of wellness, and is not eroded by what happens to their social wellness over time. So if there are ways that we're able to actually ensure that the life expectancy or the psychological wellness or the nutritional balance or the educational equity, if any of these things that we consider as basic rights, as what our humanity is based off of, then we're missing this greater point that they should have a life. I want that quality of life to exist for Black people as well. So that's how I think my work relates to human rights, is through this idea that Black life matters and that Black folks should be able to breathe. Something that's inspiring me right now to continue my work is the youth. So in every movement that we've seen in the past several decades, we've had Black youth who are standing up for rights and working hard on behalf of entire populations to have not just more rights, but equal rights, or that those that are equitable for them. And so just watching the youth this past summer in 2020 contribute to the uprising and to fight back and say this is not sufficient, we want a good quality of life, was really important for me to see. One piece of advice that can strengthen people's work, protecting human rights or becoming an ally, would be that systems that work against your ability to have equal rights or to live the life that you would want to live are the systems that we should be paying attention to. So when we think about cost of living or equal pay and the incredible push against that, even in our political system right now, or when we think about racial equality and how there's been an incredible push against that for centuries, those are the systems that people understand are the keys to true equity and true change, and that's why there's such resistance against those systems being corrected. And so I'm always just incredibly mindful that if something were done easily, then that's not the appropriate key to turn, and that's not the right system that will make the change. So if you find resistance in the work, understand that's where the work needs to happen, and that one thing that I took away from the summer's, again, 2020 summer movements, were that oftentimes the way media portrays protesters is that they're the ones who have lost touch with reality. Like, why would they continue for decades to protest, to raise fists, to throw things, to burn, to do the things that feel natural in response to these systems pushing down against them? But I flipped it and asked, why would systems continue to try to stop the will of the people from working? So if for decades and centuries you've seen the resistance and the struggle that people have engaged in to push back against these oppressive systems, why would these systems think that they could break the will of the people from year after year? So that would be my pushback, that we're often tasked as individuals to think about what's wrong with us, but I would ask the systems to think about if we are working so diligently to correct it and to change it and to make it right, why would they think that they could break us? So that would be the advice that I would give in this work, that we are resistant people who are going to make change, and the systems that need to make this change better watch out.